So the next thing that I need is a heave spring. So since that center torsion bar is the pivot axis of the push rods, it is the load bearing component. But right now I only have shocks attached to it, which will take care of damping, but I do need a spring in there. So what I need to do is create a little arm that's going to attach to the center of the sway bar and connect to a spring that's going to support the weight of the front of the vehicle. And that's called a heave spring. And this is super common on like Formula One and other road racing applications, but I've never seen it done like this. I've never seen it done where the torsion bar connects all three components together. Usually it's a much more complicated set of linkages, but I wanted to see if it was possible to do it in this architecture, and it was. It was really tough to get all the packaging in there because it's really tight. There's not a lot of space, but I was able to just pin that center heave arm to the torsion bar. And because that torsion bar is so short, it's going to be really, really stiff. It's not going to move as much as like a trophy truck torsion bar. So that heave spring will be able to support the entire weight of the vehicle without anything wiggling around or getting too loose. But here's an example of that packaging being a challenge because I had to flip the steering rack upside down. So I needed to adjust some dimensions on that bracket component and basically just rebuild it. But it was the only way to get that steering rack to fit where it needs to be and have room for the heave spring. Now that I think about it, Koenigsegg has done something similar to this, but they put the heave spring transversely, like along the axis of the torsion bar, which was kind of an interesting design. So the spring doesn't move in and out axially, it rotates axially, and that's your spring force. But I guess this just uses a traditional regular spring. But the issue that I had was sticking that spring out in the front. It was just crashing into everything. It was crashing into the steering rack. It was crashing into its own support arm, and I just couldn't get it to fit. So I ended up just flipping it upside down. And in order to do that, I needed to adjust the shape of that heave spring arm to have more of an L shape like the other pivot arms, to make sure it has lots of clearance where it needs it. And so that's what you're seeing here, just adjusting that shape. So it's sort of like a claw that reaches out and around to grab that bottom mount. So in order to flip that heave spring upside down, I needed to move the damping shocks outboard a little bit. And it was a pretty simple operation. I just adjusted their mates and then adjusted the length of the linkage, and it worked just fine. And now that shock can be mounted rearward instead of forward, and there's just a ton more clearance back there. And then this is pointed down because at full compression, you want that shock to be as close to perpendicular as possible to the pivot axis of the arm. And so that's why that shock is mounted downward a little bit.